Afternoon. National Assembly for Wales is now in session, and the first item this afternoon are questions to the First Minister. And question 1 is Kirsty Williams.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on road safety in Brecon and Radnorshire?
Yes, the Road Safety Framework for Wales sets out our approach to road safety until 2020, and it details how we will continue to deliver our programme of maintenance and improvements across the trunk road network.
First Minister, we have seen a large number of fatalities and injuries on the roads of my constituency, many of which have occurred on trunk roads, which are the responsibility of your government, especially the A40. Would you consider looking at the speed limits in the villages that are cut through by the A40 and the installation of average speed cameras from the village of Glangriney to halfway?
Yes, these are issues that are being considered. I'm aware of the strong feelings in some of the communities along the A40 and the A470, and we will give further consideration as to how road safety can be improved in those communities in the future.
Josh Watson.
Diolch Howard. First Minister, the community of Llanspydydd is one of Powys villages that has been campaigning for that reduced speed. And I know that Powys Councillor Matthew Dorrance has been campaigning alongside residents, and he's written to the Transport Minister on this very matter. And the government's review of speed limits on the trunk road network is due to be completed by the end of December. First Minister, can I have your assurances that the views of the people of Llanspydydd will be heard within that consultation?
Yes, I can say that senior officials have met with communities and gathered their comments. They will, of course, be taken into account as part of the speed limit reviews. Those reviews will be complete by the end of the year. We will then be seeking views from community councils before the end of the review, with a view to publishing a report of the findings early next year.
Russell George.
Thank you, President. First Minister, as you're aware, the Mid Wales and North Wales Trunk Road Agency merged in 2012. And this afternoon, the Minister is due to make a statement on further changes to the management of the road network. As the roads in Mid Wales are widely regarded as the most dangerous roads in Wales, can you provide assurances that to me and my constituents that any new management and delivery arrangements will prioritise the needs of Mid Wales in regards to road safety?
I see no evidence to suggest that somehow the roads in Mid Wales are the most dangerous in the way that he has described. I'm aware, of course, of the European Road Assessment Programme. I'm aware of what's been said in that, but there is no data to back up the claims made in that programme. I'm also aware that Scotland has withdrawn from Euro-RAP. So to say that the roads are the most dangerous in Britain clearly is wrong, because Scotland isn't part of the process in any event. That said, of course, the member will be aware of improvements that have been made in this constituency, the Frocosses bypass, and of course the Glandavy Bends, which, now I've said that, I forget whether the Glandavy Bends are actually in Montgomery or Ceredigion. They're in Ceredigion, there we are, Derby Junction Station, I should know better than that, but it is nevertheless on the way to Montgomery. And those bends, of course, were particularly difficult for drivers, and it's an example, of course, of developing better connectivity between the north and the south.
Simon Thomas.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Whatever you may have said, First Minister, the A44 between Llangurig and Aberystwyth is designated as the most dangerous stretch of road in Wales. That is often closed. That stretch is often closed. Just last week it was closed overnight because a lorry had left the road. Now, Ceredigion County Council has called for more goods to be transported on the railway so that there are fewer lorries on the A44, particularly from Llangurig onwards. Would that be a demand that you would support, given that Network Rail themselves expect to see an increase in the number of goods carried on our railways?
Yes, I must say that I would. And of course, this is something which is being considered at present by officials and also those organisations who consider how to get freight back onto the railroads once again. This is something that has been considered in North Wales in particular. And there was a time when timber was transported quite recently from Aberystwyth. I don't know whether that's continued, but obviously it is possible for the railroad itself to take more heavy goods, but of course we must consider the impact as regards changes and improvements in passenger services before we consider the impact on transportation of freight.
Ashgar?
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. What action will the Welsh Government take to improve the adoption service in Wales in the next 12 months, please?
Well, the National Adoption Service was launched on the 5th of November. That'll be delivered by local government with a performance management framework focused on outcomes for children, and we will use powers of direction to ensure robust arrangements are in place.
Thank you very much for the reply, Minister. The UK government at Westminster has made £19 million for support fund for adoptive parents in England from next year. Concerns have been expressed that potential adopters in Wales may be attracted by this support to detriment of adoption services in Wales. What action will the Welsh Government take alongside the new National Adoption Service for Wales to improve post-adoption services in Wales?
Well, this is an important issue, of course, and one of the points I made at the launch last week was the need to continue to put in place support for adopters through all stages of adoption, not just in the initial stages, and up to 10 or 12 years beyond. And this is certainly something that we are keen to work on with those third sector organisations who are in the field to make sure that level of support is available so that adoptions don't break down, for example, 10 years sometimes after the adoption's taken place.
Julie Morgan?
Officer, it's been reported today that the number of children being put up for adoption in England has dropped drastically since a High Court judgment about 12 months ago. And I wondered if there was any similar drop in the numbers of children being put forward for adoption in Wales.
Well, we do know that in terms of numbers, there are still a number of children, 139 to be precise, on the Wales Adoption Register, waiting to be matched with a family, but only 22 available to be matched with children as adopters. So we know that it's far from the case that there are enough people coming forward to adopt. Some of the changes in the law have made it more difficult for people in the sense of some of the loss of anonymity and some of the other issues that have arisen, and that has affected people's willingness to come forward to adopt. Nevertheless, we do know that the National Adoption Service will make it far easier to identify children for placement, rather than, of course, the previous system, which was local authorities working voluntarily with other local authorities. Much better to have a system that is truly national in order to make sure that children can be placed as quickly as possible.
Jocelyn Davis?
Officer. First Minister, I wish the new adoption service every success, but for some children, of course, adoption isn't the most suitable option, and long-term foster care can instead provide the necessary stability and support. So how does the Welsh Government intend to support long-term fostering across the country?
We would prefer to see children placed for adoption. We are fortunate in the foster carers that we have. They perform an incredible service for so many young children, but we know, of course, that there has been a tendency where children move from foster care to foster care. Not always, there are examples of children where that hasn't happened. And that disruption then, of course, affects their very lives, their education. There are statistics that suggest that looked after children, for example, are more likely to end up in prison than in university. And this is something that we have very much focused on and targeted support towards. But one of the difficulties, of course, is that adopters who put themselves forward quite often want very young children or even babies. And the reality is that most children are not in that category. And that's what makes it difficult in order to get them adopted. But nevertheless, the adoption service itself will provide a seamless way of ensuring that children have the best chance of adoption and the best chance then of stability in their lives. Of course, for some it will be foster care, but I think the aim has to be to provide that level of stability as quickly as possible and for as long a time as possible.
Al Roberts?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, there was quite a definite view amongst the members of the Children and Young People's Commission that the service should be driven or sent outside local authority. You've mentioned the report this afternoon saying that there will be a framework, but may I ask also whether you're happy with the structure of reporting back to local councils if questions remain on the performance, bearing in mind all the dissatisfaction that existed with the system between this new national service was established?
no. There is a governing board which has been established, and the role of the board is to ensure that the service does operate correctly and meets the targets set for it, and meets the targets in the ministerial framework also. Ministers will then receive reports on a 6-monthly basis in terms of how things are going in terms of the system itself. So there is a means of reporting back to ministers and the board in place in order to ensure that the service actually achieves the target set for it.
Now move to questions to the party leaders, and first this afternoon the Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch Llywydd. First Minister, last week a small community was shocked and horrified by the news of a brutal murder on the part of an ex-prisoner who it is said suffered from a serious mental health condition. I'm sure that you'd want to join me in offering condolences to the families who've been affected by this awful case. And whilst the exact details of the case remain uncertain and we await the serious case review, we do know that the provision of mental health services is insufficient or inadequate in Wales today. Do you share my concerns that due to pressures in the system, that people with serious mental health conditions may well be diverted to the criminal justice system?
Well, I think, first of all, I would join the Leader of Plaid Cymru in expressing horror, really, at the events as they have been described. There needs to be, of course, a full review of the facts of what happened. What we do know, and this was confirmed, I understand, in Parliament earlier on, is that this man was in the care of the prison authorities. He was released from prison and therefore was not under the care of a devolved authority. Now, if there are any issues that arise as a result of the review that we need to address, then we will, of course, address them.
First Minister, there are many factors impacting upon support for offenders with mental health conditions, and of course the privatisation and the overstretching of the probation service, overcrowding in prisons, as well as the general austerity agenda make the lack of capacity within the mental health system even worse potentially. Given that so many agencies can be involved in a case like this, what assurances can you give us that agencies, whether devolved or non-devolved, are working together effectively?
Well, we would always seek to work, of course, with non-devolved agencies. I can't comment in terms of their performance, if I can put it that way, though that's for others to explain that. But nevertheless, we would, of course, as we do work with the prisons, make sure that there is as seamless a system as possible when it comes to dealing with offenders. The Leader of Plaid Cymru is right. There are people in the criminal justice system who in previous years would not have been there. And I had experience of representing somebody who had once lived in the Park prison, in the Park hospital, came out through care in the community, was not properly supported and ended up in the Park prison on the very same site. And I'm not sure that system has yet changed to the extent that we would want it to.
First Minister, today is of course Remembrance Day, and I want to take this opportunity to highlight the specific needs of veterans in terms of mental well-being. Last week, Plaid Cymru published proposals for supporting veterans, which included the auditing of the number of veterans in prison, as well as those in receipt of benefits and those who have become homeless. The Party of Wales also proposes compulsory mental health assessments for veterans prior to leaving the armed forces. Are you prepared to support this proposal, and do you agree that this is something that, with investment, could be provided by the Welsh National Health Service?
First of all, we would all want to support our veterans. I think that much is clear. We already work, of course, very, very closely with the Royal British Legion in terms of ensuring that veterans are supported in Wales. And, of course, we are in very regular contact with them. I'm not convinced at the moment of the need for a compulsory mental health assessment for all those who leave the armed services. I'm not sure they would particularly want to be seen in that way. But nevertheless, it's important, of course, that we continue to work on the community covenants that have been put in place, and also to continue contact with the British Legion and others to make sure that the service to veterans is what we would expect it to be.
We now move to Leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, in July, your government restated its aim for Wales to be the best place to grow old. Yesterday, the Older Persons Commissioner said that too many old people in care homes have an unacceptable quality of life. Does her report match your aspiration for Wales to indeed be the best place to grow old?
It certainly helps because we then know what's happening. This is the Older Persons Commissioner doing her job, and we very much welcome the report itself. It does show strong examples of excellent care in homes across Wales. It also shows examples of where that level of care is not to the standard that people would expect. Can I say that work is already underway in relation to a number of the recommendations within the document. A care home task and finish group was established in July to ensure effective oversight and coordination of action to ensure the quality and sustainability of care for the sector in the longer term. That clearly is important. We have, of course, the white paper as well, which last year set out our proposals to strengthen the regulation and inspection of social services. And many of the areas of improvement set out by the Older People's Commissioner are indeed contained within those reforms that we'll be introducing through the draft bill that will be put to the National Assembly the next few months. On top of that, of course, we will continue to consider any extra issues that the Commissioner has raised in order to deal with them.
Over 6 years have passed since you enacted legislation to establish the post of the Commissioner, and the government did enshrine the UN principles for older people in law. But the results so far have been a report that concludes, and I quote, "Too many older people living in care homes quickly become institutionalised. Their personal identity and individuality rapidly diminishes, and they have a lack of choice and control over their lives." Whilst I appreciate that a task and finish group has been set up, when do you envisage an Older Persons Commissioner for Wales being able to report on a care home service that actually empowers older people and give them the quality of life that we would all expect for ourselves and our relatives?
I think we're on the way to that. I think what the report demonstrates is that things have improved over the years. I know that 100 homes obviously were visited across Wales. The emphasis was, of course, on raising quality and expectations and not about serious failures in safeguarding. We are now moving beyond trying to get a system with minimum standards to a system where we expect those standards to be exceeded. And it's through reports such as this that we can actually understand where the failings are in the system, if those standards are not being met, draw on the excellent care that is available in some care homes, and then, of course, ensure that there's greater consistency in the system.
First Minister, the report says that care homes are seen as places of irreversible decline. Do you agree with me that that should not be the case? And First Minister, 1 in 5 people in Wales are over 65, and that figure is set to rise as a percentage of the population. When do you envisage a situation where people will see entry into a care home as a positive choice rather than what is often perceived as a negative choice, and one that many older people are simply fearful of?
I entirely agree that that is the perception amongst older people and indeed some of their families. And then you see families, of course, who are reluctant to see a relative go into a care home, and that, of course, places great burden sometimes on those families. In terms of how we remove that stigma, one way of doing it, of course, is to see the continued rollout of extra care facilities. At one time, it was assumed people either stayed at home or they went into a home, as people put it. The extra care facilities are fantastic in terms of being able to give people the independence that they want, but yet have the support that they also require. And I know members will have visited some of the facilities, and they are absolutely wonderful. As we see the estate, as it were, change over the next 5, 10, 15 years, I think we will then see a breakdown of that stigma that suggests that going into a care home is simply a path to an irreversible and inevitable decline.
And now Leader of the Opposition, Andrew R.G. Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, could I join you and the Leader of Plaid Cymru in the sentiments that you expressed about the horrific events in Argoed last week? The older you get, you do think you've heard it all, but all of a sudden you see things like this come out, and they're truly horrific. The explanations and the reports that have come out from that community, and our thoughts and prayers are with everyone who is connected with that tragedy. Could I ask you, First Minister, I appreciate it's not your government that has commissioned this this report by the Ministry of Justice, which is going to be under the scope of the Serious Further Offences Review. Will there be any role for the Welsh Government, in particular in light of the evidence that has come forward that does show that, in particular in the field of mental health, there has been an issue around the service provision of mental health services in the community?
We will always seek to work with the UK Government when it comes to the treatment and rehabilitation of offenders. We will also, of course, seek to influence what is a non-devolved area. And it's important, of course, that where offenders leave prison, that there is sufficient signposting and guidance for them to leave the non-devolved part of their care and move on to the devolved part of their care. For them, it doesn't matter, of course, but it's important that the system is as seamless as it can be.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. Most of all, I was trying to look and maybe draw on some of your legal experience, if you'd forgive me, whether that, under the formal way that this review would be undertaken, is there a mechanism for the medical aspects of this particular case to be considered? Because the evidence that has come forward does seem to indicate that within the prison environment, the offender's schizophrenia, which was diagnosed at the age of 16, was managed and the necessary treatment was in place. Regrettably, once the offender stepped outside that prison environment and into the community, obviously that's where the treatment seems to have fallen down. And I understand that on both events, if you like, within the prison and outside the prison, it is commissioned from the Welsh Health Service, and I visited Park Prison some 2 weeks ago, and I have to commend the excellent work that goes on at Park Prison and the support that they do offer in these particular instances.
I'm no longer insured to give legal advice, so I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition will forgive me for that, but he raises a serious point, and that is, how can we be sure that those people who behave in a certain way in a certain environment are helped not to behave in a different way when they leave that environment? It's in the nature of, and I don't want to talk about the specific case, I think there needs to be a full investigation of the case before we can make a judgment on it, but with many illnesses, people can manage those illnesses in terms of their environment. With other illnesses, of course, it's important that people take medication. If they, for some reason, don't take that medication, they will relapse. And it's in the nature of some psychiatric conditions that people don't think they're ill, so they don't take the medication. And we saw that with care in the community, particularly in the early 1990s, where that happened quite often. In terms of the tragic and appalling events that members have made reference to, I think it's best to see what the results of the review actually present. If there are ways in which there can be improvements in perhaps what could be described as a handover, then clearly we will look at that. And of course, if there are ways of ensuring that people have a fuller assessment before they leave prison in order to reassure the public, that will need to be looked at as well. But I'm reluctant to be drawn to the detail of this case because it does deserve full investigation for the good of the families involved.
I agree with you entirely. Obviously, there is some considerable investigative work to go on into this subject, but obviously there's a lot of questions out there that many people are looking for answers, and quite a bit of background information has already been provided. Regrettably, later on today, there will be another report issued into an equally traumatic event of a man who was released from a hospital in Denbighshire and went on to commit an horrendous crime in Tenerife in 2011, another individual who was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. There are wider questions, obviously, that need to be addressed around mental health service and provision here in Wales, but ultimately, on the specifics that I've asked you in my first two questions, will the Welsh Government be undertaking a serious case review into the provision of service that was available for the offender in this particular instance?
I think we have to wait to see what the full facts are before deciding what else can be done. That much is important. The difficulty, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this, but the difficulty with some psychiatric conditions is that people can be very rational in particular circumstances. So, for example, it's well established in law that it's possible for somebody who may suffer from a serious mental illness to be able to give consent to an operation because they're able to give that consent properly in those circumstances. It's quite often the case that somebody has a particular condition that doesn't manifest itself in all circumstances, and they can appear quite rational at times, whereas at other times they aren't. I think what we need to do is to wait to see what the full facts are surrounding this particular case. We, of course, will seek to find out what more we can do, if there are lessons there for us. I know that Chris Grayling has already said there are lessons there for him and for his department, and we will of course work with them to make sure that incidents like this don't get repeated in the future.
We now move back to questions on the paper, and question 3 is Lynn Eagle.
What discussions has the First Minister had with the Minister for Public Services regarding the impact of the draft budget on local government services?
There have been discussions, obviously both in Cabinet and indeed with the Minister. We know that there are challenges for local government, but unfortunately we can't pass on what we ourselves don't have.
Thank you, First Minister. And of course, I do understand that the blame for reductions in local government funding lies with the coalition government and the massive cuts that they have inflicted on the Welsh budget. However, I do think we have to recognise how tough the latest settlement will be for authorities like Torfaen, particularly on the back of a very challenging settlement last year that has already impacted hugely on services that people really care about. While it's clear, First Minister, that change is on its way when it comes to local government in Wales, will you commit to working with local authorities that are expressing legitimate concerns in order to ensure that local services and vulnerable people are protected as much as possible?
Absolutely. Yes, of course, and we have protected local government for some 4 years from the brunt of the austerity measures that have been passed on to us from Whitehall, but we can't do it forever. There are challenges now, of course, for local government, difficult decisions that have to be made in the same way as we have to take difficult decisions here as a Welsh Government. But nevertheless, we'd expect local authorities to look to protect the most vulnerable first, to look to avoid compulsory redundancies where they can, to work together where it's possible to provide the same level of service but at a lower cost. All these things will need to be looked at by local authorities, not just this year, but in the years to come, because we know that there are still difficult years ahead of us in terms of providing the level of services that all would want to see.
Jonathan Saunders.
Thank you, President. First Minister, following the up to 4.6% cuts in the draft local government settlement, the Minister for Public Services has actually indicated that he's quite happy now for local authorities to impose charges for some of the service provision. And we've already seen some local authorities coming forward now with council tax increase announcements of 5% upwards. People will be paying more and receiving less under your Welsh Labour government. Now, this comes at a time when there is over £1 billion in reserves across Welsh local authorities. What steps are you taking to ensure that council tax increases are not just seen as an automatic way, placing that burden on our hard-working residents and families to make good of your cuts? And what are your views on implementing a cap on council tax so that this burden is not passed directly to our residents?
Well, I have to say to the member, she does try to avoid the fact that the money that we get comes from her party and the Liberal Democrats. Council tax in Wales remains substantially lower than council tax in England. That much has to be emphasised. It is the case that Welsh local government is still funded at a far higher level than is the case in England. And has been for many, many, many years. And she contradicts herself, if I may say, by saying on the one hand these are Welsh Labour cuts and then saying that the local authorities have £1 billion in reserves. There is an element of contradiction in what she has said there. It's for each local authority to decide how they wish to set their budgets. It is for them to decide what level of council tax they wish to set. But, of course, ministers retain the power to cap council tax rises where that is deemed appropriate.
Claire Griffith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the Welfare Rights Unit in Denbighshire is facing threats, as are many across Wales, because of the cuts to budgets. What assessment has the Welsh Government made of the impact of the closure of these services at the very time when they are most needed by the most vulnerable people in our communities?
Well, I know that many people won't receive any kind of advice at all, and there'll be more pressure on people like the Citizens Advice Bureau, and I know that about £500 million will be taken out of the Welsh economy because of the cuts to the benefit system.
Question 4, Sandy Muse.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, will you provide an update on the Welsh Government's actions to promote tourism in Wales?
Yes, we have our tourism strategy, Partnership for Growth, which has an overall vision for growing tourism in Wales by 10% by 2020, and a full report on the first year of progress is on the Welsh Government Tourism website.
Thank you for that. It was encouraging that the Great Britain Tourism Survey shows tourism in Wales is continuing to rise, particularly during a period when for the rest of Great Britain visitor numbers have fallen. Some of our iconic and best known attractions are doing particularly well, including near to me in Llandudno, which has been named by TripAdvisor as one of the best 10 destinations in the UK. But we have a number of other popular visitor attractions throughout Wales, and several of them are in my own constituency of Delyn, where tourism is an integral part of the local economy. Can I ask First Minister, what action is the Welsh Government taking to support these attractions and help them swell numbers?
Well, the strategy itself, of course, provides a level of support. We know that in the August bank holiday, nearly 70% of attractions had experienced a higher or equal level of visits compared to the year before. We know, as the members rightly pointed out, that trips to Wales were up 3.2% in the first 3 months of this year, and the UK equivalent figure was a drop of 9.8%. We have digital marketing, which of course has an increasingly wide reach. We also undertake social media activity, over 450,000 followers on Facebook and on Twitter. And we also target marketing investment on key markets, such as, for example, Ireland, Germany and the USA. The figures that we have seen so far give us great cause for optimism in the course of this year. And of course, we couldn't have a more public endorsement than that of the President of the USA, Barack Obama, when he encouraged Americans to visit Wales as well.
Susie Davis.
Llywyd, First Minister, you're right, we've had a glorious summer and overall visitor numbers are up. That coincides with a new Welsh Government advertising strategy, of course, but are you able to say which tools you use to identify how much of that growth is directly due to the strategy and how much of that might be due to other factors, including growth in the economy or activities undertaken by tourism businesses themselves?
Well, I think the best evidence of that is the fact that trips to Wales were up 3.2% in the first 3 months of this year, and there was a drop of 9.8% across the UK as a whole. That to me is at the very least an indication that the marketing strategy we have employed has been successful at a time of a sadly significant drop in numbers elsewhere in the UK.
Alan Fred Jones.
Thank you very much. Businesses in Caernarfon have had a very successful summer, and the work that Cadw has done within castle walls in an area known as the south of France has been warmly welcomed, but we do need interpretation boards there. And there is a site behind the Harbour Master's office on the Slate Quay that still needs to be developed, and that's a key site as it's next door or adjacent to the castle. Will you ensure that your departments take advantage of every opportunity to look at the potential of improving the environment in the historic and ancient town of Caernarfon?
Well, I'll ask the Minister to write to you with the details, but of course Caernarfon has seen major changes, not only in terms of the castle, but also what's happened in Victoria Quay, the businesses there and the hotels there, and the way that the old buildings there have been redeveloped in a sympathetic manner. So in terms of the properties that you've mentioned, I will ask the Minister to write to you with his comments on that.
Question 5, Bethan Jenkins.
Will the First Minister make a statement on sports provision across Wales?
Yes, sport provision across Wales is provided by a variety of organisations, and we of course work with these organisations to increase participation in sport and to ensure there are continuing opportunities for local sporting activity.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. Quite often you say as ministers that you're unable to answer questions with regards to local authority sporting issues. But on this occasion, you will be aware of the proposition by Neath Talbot Council to close Cymer swimming pool. I believe that this has a national significance because not only is it in a situation of relative isolation, there are high levels of diabetes in that area, and it is a facility that does accommodate many people that cannot reach other such sporting facilities. Would you not agree with me and your former colleague, Dr. Brian Gibbons, that making this decision would be detrimental to the community in Cymer and the surrounding areas? And would you seek to discuss this with not only Neath Talbot Council but Celtic Leisure too?
Well, these are matters, of course, for the local authority. They will need to consider all factors relating to the swimming pool. There are cost factors, of course, but there are other factors, and the member has made mention of those factors. There are, we understand, discussions that will still need to take place between the local authority and the community. Sport Wales have also asked the Council for the business case on the potential closure, as well as an assessment of the impact on the local community. So there are still areas that will still need to be examined, as they should be, before any final decision is taken.
David Rees.
The First Minister, as Bethan Jenkins highlighted, the Cymru swimming pool is one of the local authorities, was under threat by local authorities because of the cuts coming from the Tory government in Westminster. There's no question about that. But it's an area of deprivation. It's got some of the highest losses because of the welfare reform coming from this government as well. In fact, it's top 3 of the wards and top 10 in Wales being affected by the welfare reform cuts coming from them. So those issues need to be looked at. Will the Welsh Government be looking at ways it can help communities to establish social enterprises? Because it's not just Cymru swimming pools under threat. There are other sporting activities where groups are being asked to actually take on the facilities and responsibilities of the sporting activities. And will you be looking at ways in which we can help those groups develop and support them?
Yes, very much so. I think there are opportunities for voluntary organisations to run facilities. I know it happens in other parts of Wales. We wouldn't expect people to look at running facilities without any kind of support. Clearly not. It's a big undertaking. I would encourage the Council and Sport Wales and others to look at alternatives to the closure of the swimming pool, given, of course, the area that it's in, and to work with the local community to see if there are any community solutions that can be found in order to keep the pool open in the future.
Mohammed Ashgar.
Madam Presiding Officer. First, Mr. The provision of playing fields and swimming pools is vital for the development of sports in Wales. Why, therefore, has the Welsh Government decided not to implement the Localism Act in Wales, which would give communities the right to bid to buy such assets of community value to safeguard the sporting places in future?
Well, the Localism Bill is an English bill, and in 2011 the people of Wales decided it was a matter for this Assembly as to what legislation should be passed in the areas that the Assembly had responsibility for. We always, of course, look to see what lessons we can learn from any other part of the UK, but it's not a question of not implementing the Localism Act. It wasn't a Welsh Act.
William Powell.
First Minister, one important aspect of sports provision is surely ensuring that the necessary support is in place for those people who can no longer take part in their chosen sport because of disabling injury on the field of play. And it's at that point when organisations such as the WRU Charitable Trust come into their own to support former players, such as one young lady known to me, Gwynafyd RFC former rugby star Francis Bateman, who suffered severe injury 3 years ago on the rugby field. And just last Saturday, she was able to showcase the support that she's received from the Benevolent Trust to His Royal Highness the Duke of Cambridge. In that context, First Minister, what can your government do to promote the development of similar support across other major sports in Wales to alleviate the difficulties suffered by former sportspeople?
These are matters primarily for the governing bodies, first of all. But the rugby, of course, has proportionately a higher level of injuries, not as it used to be, but certainly the injuries are not as rare as we would want them to be. I know, for example, that His Royal Highness the Duke of Cambridge is exceptionally interested in the Charitable Trust, and these are issues which he takes a deep interest in when he comes to Cardiff. He meets with those who are being helped by the Trust itself. And I commend the WRU for setting up the Trust, and I think it's important that other sporting bodies consider similar arrangements for themselves in order to help those who, through playing sport, wanted to keep fit, but who have been hit by tragedy on the playing field or in other sporting arenas.
Question 6, Elena Parrott.
Diolch Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government transport priorities for the remainder of 2014 and 15?
Yes, we'll continue to deliver our programme of schemes and initiatives to improve transport provision across Wales, and we will also publish the new draft National Transport Plan for consultation before Christmas.
Thank you. Your programme for government and your national transport plan both make pledges to improve the rail network and boost passenger numbers. But passengers on Welsh rail services are currently experiencing huge problems with overcrowding, with passengers left at platforms over this weekend and the preceding weeks as well. Now, with Valiant Lines electrification and any new rolling stock that brings still several years away yet, what will you do in the intervening period to relieve the situation for Welsh commuters? Because if your government is pledging to boost passenger numbers, it is your government that will have to act to achieve that, isn't it?
Well, we have supported additional rolling stock on peak trains on the Valley Lines routes. We have provided trains for new services and extra capacity, of course, on the north-south route. And we've also provided funding to Arriva Trains Wales for the refurbishment of their fleet to improve passenger quality on board. There is a limit, of course, to what we can do, given the fact that the franchising system is not fully devolved, nor is rail infrastructure devolved either. We believe that if those two matters were devolved, we could do even more for rail passengers in Wales.
Anne Jones.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the A55 is a trans-European network. Unfortunately, it gets snagged up on occasions when we have heavy goods vehicles who have accidents, or that there are issues of pinch point problems along the A55. What can your government do to hasten the removal of freight from the A55 and from other roads, and look at whether we can't do something, especially if we're looking at electrification of the North Wales line? Is this not a time to be looking to get freight off the road and back on the rail?
Well, we do offer financial support to encourage modal shift, but of course, freight is a market-led sector. It depends on what the price is in terms of carrying freight. That said, the Ministerial Task Force on North Wales Transport, which the Minister has established, has identified scope for increased rail freight as a priority for its work. And that is built into the case that we have been making to the Department for Transport about improvements to the North Wales main line, including, of course, at some point, electrification.
Nick Ramsey.
First Minister, you'll be pleased to know I've got my own road gripe in South Wales to raise with you. And as winter sets in, my constituents dread the perennial flooding problems that afflicts the A4042 at Llanellan, just south of Abergavenny. I've raised this with the Business Minister a number of times. This flooding causes havoc for communities and for local businesses each year. Ideally, we would like to see a bypass in that area, but in the absence of that, will you undertake to look again at this stretch of road and prioritise appropriate works that will help alleviate the problem for my constituents?
Where we have responsibility for trunk roads, we will of course do that. Where there are issues of regular flooding on some sections of road, then of course working with NRW, we will of course look to find solutions to deal with that flooding.
Rhynab Iorwerth.
Diolch Llywydd. Will the First Minister give an outline of any deal he's tried to negotiate that we might expect to see an announcement on in the autumn statement that might allow us to invest in infrastructure in transport right across Wales?
That's quite a convoluted question. If I can try to unravel that, we will have to wait and see, of course, what's in the autumn statement, and if we, of course, are not in a position of knowing what will be in it until it's actually made.
Christine Chapman.
Thank you. First Minister, bus services are vital for villages like Cyflwynir in my constituency, which has no direct train links. It was recently brought to my attention by constituents that there was to be no bus service to and from the village after 6 o'clock in the evening. However, I am pleased to note that due to the diligence of local people, the local council, my office manager, RCT council officials and the bus company, as from the 17th of November, services from Pontypridd to Aberdare will be diverted through the village. Will you join with me, First Minister, in welcoming this news? And do you agree that despite the challenging times, by working collaboratively, we can achieve results?
Yes, and I congratulate the member for her efforts. I understand that the service, the diversion of the 60A service will begin from next Monday. Obviously very important to the people of Cyflwynir. I understand that there's also the potential for the reintroduction of 2 evening return journeys through Trallwyn to Oaklands on Service 103 that Rhondda Cynon Taf is exploring at the moment. But clearly it's important that where services are lost, that innovative solutions are found to at least partially restore those services, and I'm glad to see it's been done in this instance.
Question 7, Joyce Watson.
Diolch Llawed. Will the First Minister make a statement on preparations for winter flooding?
Yes, we remain vigilant throughout the year. Of course, it's not just the winter where we see flooding, as the residents of Ceredigion, for example, will only sadly know. The National Flood Forecasting Centre does provide constant monitoring. NRW do make duty staff available on a 24-hour basis, and the emergency services do have plans in place alongside our Welsh flood risk management authorities.
You're right to say it's not winter flooding, and residents in my region have already experienced the first, first wave of flooding only at the weekend, and flood warnings are issued again for the coming week. And we know that flood prevention is expensive, and that National Resources Wales has already spent 165 million during the last 3 years, but it does save money in the long run. So my question, First Minister, is this: can you assure my constituents that your government will continue to prioritise investment for flood prevention projects to spend now against mitigation that might happen in the future?
Absolutely. We recognise the importance of investing in flooding. We are investing over £245 million in flood and coastal defences over the lifetime of this government. In addition to this, of course, we will receive almost £50 million from the ERDF, and of course a number of projects have been taken forward over the course of the last 2 years. So where flooding is identified as a problem, we seek to take action as quickly as possible. The challenge, however, given climate change, is what happens in areas where flooding is not usually seen as a regular occurrence, and Talabont is one example of a flooding incident that happened, which is probably impossible to predict, but nevertheless now has to be factored into predictions of flooding in the future.
Paul Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, following the events over the past few days where we've seen a number of floods, particularly in my constituency, what additional assistance have you as a government given to authorities such as Pembrokeshire?
Well, of course, there is support available where crises do happen. That happened in Aberystwyth, in Rhyl, in Kinmel Bay, and also in Amroth as a result of the events there. £7.2 million were provided in terms of dealing with floods, and we're investing in the future in communities such as Borth, Colwyn Bay, Rhyl, Denbigh, Ystrygynlais, Corwen, just to give you a few examples in Wales where there are flood prevention schemes which are progressing or have progressed.
Prif Weinidog.
First Minister, there were floods in the old Cardigan town last week once again, and some properties were flooded for the second time within the year. The response of the emergency services was excellent as per usual, but communities do feel, I'm thinking of the community of Llanbadarn, where there was a meeting with Natural Resources Wales and a week ago, and Cardigan, where they will be meeting with NRA next week. They would like the long-term plans can be very slow in being implemented. Could you raise with NRA the need for them to give communities an assurance that they do want to collaborate with communities in order to protect houses and property and communities for the future?
It's very important, and I will write to the member with a response to that, particularly in terms of Cardigan, given the recent events.
Thank you, First Minister. Now, I have accepted an urgent question.